Welcome to Marvel Maniac and MCU Aftershow. This is your host, Eric Cicada, aka Mr. Honest. We're back for another episode involving the God of Thunder himself, Thor, and his second movie and his third appearance in the MCU. This is the Thor Dark World Aftershow. This movie does a lot of world building, and it introduces a new Infinity Stone, the Reality Stone, in this movie mostly referred to as the Ether. Like Iron Man 3, which we just covered, and the next movie we'll cover, Captain America the Winter Soldier, this movie deals with the fallout of the Avengers and what toll that took on our main character Thor in this movie. And also, where did Loki end up after calling out an entire war between New York and Asgard and the Chitauri? It's a lot to follow up, and this movie does a really good job of getting deeper into these characters that we already know and we've already come to love, and gives them more depth, and it gives all the relationships, especially between Thor and his family and Loki and his family, they're really built in this movie. Spoiler alert for everything that's happened in Thor's story through Thor Love and Thunder and everything in the MCU that's happened through Phase 4, because we're going to touch on how that connects to this movie and kind of what later things happen in the MCU to make this movie stand a little bit stronger and hold a little bit more a place in my heart when I come back to watch it. It's very nostalgic because I did see this movie in theaters when it came out, as I did most of the MCU films. Directed by Alan Taylor and released on November 5th, 2013, Thor the Dark World starts off sort of like the first one did, with a history and a narration from Odin, explaining how thousands of years ago there were the Dark Elves, and they pretty much came before the Age of Man, and they ruled over darkness, and once the light on humanity showed up in the world, they wanted to turn it all to dark. Odin's father went to war with the Dark Elves and won, and their leader Malekith went into this hibernation once he lost, and I guess he would be only awakened when the Ether / the Reality Stone would come back into play and be awakened, and be put back to use. Throughout this whole movie, Malekith has some sort of an internal connection to the Reality Stone, and there's some sort of power he has, he's completely connected to it. So from the Reality Stone goes back so early in time, connected to the Dark Elves, and its history almost starts with the Dark Elves. When Odin's father won the war, he decided to hide the Reality Stone, aka the Ether, on Earth, and it wouldn't be found for thousands of years. And who is the person to find the Reality Stone? It's Jane Foster herself, who in a later Thor movie, this is where my spoiler alert comes in, she does get cancer and gets very sick, and it's kind of a popular theory, and it's kind of hard to watch this movie thinking that when she has the Reality Stone or the Ether in her, this might have been the start or the cause of her sickness and the reason she ends up dying in the end. And that's kind of a really heavy thought, but I fully believe it because we know from Avengers Endgame that the Infinity Stones have gamma radiation, similar to what the Hulk was exposed to turn him into the Hulk, and this probably didn't sit well in Jane's body after being in there for a couple of days. Even she housed an Infinity Stone in her body for however many days it was in this movie until Malekith takes it out of her towards the end. She's just sitting with it. It makes her pass out at times. She's basically this is what kind of shows her potential later on to become Lady Thor. Her the power that she's able to hold an Infinity Stone. That power is in Jane Foster for a big portion of this movie, and I'm not surprised that it takes a toll on her later. It's just heartbreaking. The movie starts off with the 9 realms kind of in chaos because what Loki did in Avengers kind of sent ripples throughout the galaxy. So the 9 realms that Thor is supposed to protect are sort of in shambles because the Bifrost was broken after the original Thor. So there was no way for Thor to protect the 9 realms for a certain amount of time, especially during and when the events of Avengers happened on Earth. It kind of was a call to other realms that chaos is going to start breaking out. So there's these marauders that Thor's fighting in the beginning of the movie, and it's kind of his final fight in that war that he's been having kind of off screen to bring the nine realms to peace. Earth kind of being the first one with Loki's attack, and then the others. One of the nine realms is the Dark World, in which this movie is named after, and that's the realm of the Dark Elves. It's technically called Svartalheim, as they talk about in the extra features. I'm gonna advise any Super Marvel fans that have Disney Plus. That's where most of us are watching nowadays, I'm guessing. If you go into the extras section of any Marvel movie on Disney Plus, they have deleted scenes, bonus content. If you like the assembled, the making of on Disney Plus for the newer shows and movies, you're gonna love these special features. It's pretty much that for these movies, because we don't get the assembled making of Thor Dark World. All of the special features are available on Disney Plus. So if you don't know about that, I didn't, and it's kind of been blowing my mind. So I would go do that. I would go check that out if you're interested. So yeah, we get a lot of action from the get-go of this movie, seeing that war between Odin's father and the Dark Elves, and then going to kind of where Thor is present day, fighting in protecting the nine realms. He's in one of the other realms, and he fights a big rock creature that kind of reminds me of Korg, and I think he might be the same race as Korg, if I'm not wrong. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's like a Korg. And if he's not, he's a big rock creature similar to Korg. And I kind of really dig that. We kind of get to see an early representation of his species, and this giant rock creature is totally the big bad of these this Marauder's army, and Thor is fighting on the battlefield, and then this thing steps out to Thor they're gonna have a huge fight, and Thor just knocks him into bits and rocks in one fell swoop. So Thor is as powerful as ever in this movie. He's like anyone else, and he has his companions from the first movie, including Sif, who's one of my favorites. I think she's awesome. She's so badass. Sif has a lot of action in this movie, maybe even more than the first movie. We may get more Sif in this movie than any other Thor film. Also, with the returns of Fandral, Volstagg, and Hogun, Thor's kind of entourage, and they do help him escape Asgard at one point in the film, but we'll get there, because this movie, there's a lot happening, but at the same time, it's kind of a simple, straightforward story. And at first, I remember when the movie came out, there was kind of not the best reaction to it, but I think Thor movies age well. I really do, especially sitting in between the future installments of Thor and in Thor Ragnarok, or even the Avengers Infinity War storyline for Thor into Endgame. You look back at Thor Dark World as this really nice placeholder that really helps build these characters. We get to see Loki being walked into Odin's throne room after his attack on New York against the Avengers, and he is kind of laughing it off, Loki, but Loki is being sent to a prison cell for the rest of his life by Odin. Odin pretty much tells him it was your right to die, and Odin's pretty much broken off his feelings or affection for Loki. But we go into a bit of a theory at the end of this movie on how Loki came to hold the throne for Odin. Basically between these two movies, Thor Dark World and Thor Ragnarok, Loki continues to hold the throne, but we don't really get to know exactly how he got it, and it seems at first that it's something that he did to Odin, and you don't know did he kill Odin in secrecy or something, but it turns out that Odin is just spending his time on Earth. So it actually seems that in this movie, when Loki goes to confront Odin, the last we see Loki in the movie, to disguise himself as a Asgardian guard and to tell him that Loki's body is dead. He was lying to Odin about him being dead. It's my theory really that at that time Odin, he says Loki when he's replying to the guard, and it seems like in that moment Odin's assuming that Loki died, but in reality what happened is Loki, he knew it was Loki, and I think Odin actually gave the throne to Loki in secrecy, and the people wouldn't really accept that, but after knowing what he did for his brother Thor, and also knowing that Thor isn't going to want to take the throne at this point because he's in love with Jane Foster and he's off doing stuff for the Avengers, it's pretty much assumed by me personally that Odin gave Loki the throne and decided to retire on Earth. Maybe that's explored further in Thor Ragnarok in a way that I missed or I don't remember exactly. However, it seems to me that Loki just sits his butt on the throne up until the events of Ragnarok. So Loki's it was my right to be a king, and Odin says, "You're right. It was your right to die." And he sends Loki to the prison cell, and this is when Thor comes home and he's kind of like in having a big celebration with his companions about kind of bringing a temporary peace to the Nine Realms. Back on Earth, Jane Foster is on a blind date, and it's not going super well for the guy who's like on the date with her. He's doing his best to like keep Jane's attention, but Jane is very distracted. Gets even more distracted when Darcy Lewis returns for her second time in the MCU. You know, we later get to see her in WandaVision. This is like, I believe, the last time we even get to see her before WandaVision. It's a huge gap in a character's story, and that type of continuity in the MCU is fantastic when we get characters jumping around from movie to show to, you know, one thing to another. Like in WandaVision, we get Darcy and we get Jimmy Woo. So we get someone from the Ant-Man and the Wasp, and we get someone from the Thor franchise, all like dealing with this in-universe issue. It's the stuff that, like, this is the groundwork for it right here in these early phases. A character like Darcy Lewis is a perfect example who we'll probably even get more of in the MCU going forward in different things. I was like kind of surprised she didn't show up in Thor Love and Thunder. I don't believe we got to see her at all in that because we probably just got to see her in WandaVision, and her path from Jane kind of diverts, I guess, a little bit. You know, by the time she's in WandaVision, she's doing something completely different. So anyway, we meet Darcy kind of trying to get Jane out of this date that she's on because she's getting like these crazy readings, similar to when Thor landed in New Mexico. So this leads them, along with Darcy's like assistant, who like she has like it's kind of like a love interest for her in the movie. I think that's all fair. It's all fun. That's maybe like my least favorite aspect of the movie, but like it's not even that bad. Like, who cares? Like, let Darcy find love. I don't think it's just a little distracting from the main story, and like it's almost like we only really need Darcy and Jane Foster and Eric Selvig again. We don't really need this assistant of theirs. Intern, sorry, he goes by the intern. He's not really like needed, but he's good comedic relief at times. And you know what? Darcy deserves to be in love too. Although I don't think this really lasts or like pans out for her in the long run. So it's kind of just like a side thing in this movie. So the thing that Thor's dad stopped the Dark Elves from doing was using the ether when at a specific time during convergence, when all the nine realms align, and it happens once every like 1,000-something years, and this is happening again where we are in the present timeline, 2013 at this movie, and this is kind of what's causing, I think, the reality stone to go crazy, and it's causing like anomalies and sending out all these spikes of like, you already see that it's giving off gamma radiation, by the way, in the beginning of the movie. Their readings are going crazy for it, even miles away from it. And by the time Jane gets to it, like there's these portals opening up all around the place, and kind of like wormholes where they throw their car keys in, and like it keeps, well, the car keys got lost actually, but like they're throwing like pop cans, and it's like going through like this dimension and popping out of another dimension. So there's a lot of use of that in this movie thanks to the ether. And Jane Foster ends up walking into a portal that leads to the house of the ether. I'm assuming that like the ether was buried way below or something from where they find it, and like it just opens up a portal on the ground surface or something like that, because like where Jane Foster finds it, it's in like this deep dark cove. You know, the way the portals work at the end of the movie, it's not even super specific, but like the portals that the ether causes in this movie that are like kind of that Jane Foster falls into, and like later Thor is fighting Malekith at the end of the movie, and they're going through these portals, and it's leading them to the other realms. So it's very possible that the ether was hidden. Maybe it was on Earth, but there's a chance that the ether was hidden like deep dark somewhere in one of the nine realms, and it just opened up a portal on Earth, and like that was the beginning of the convergence in which like Eric Selvig is like losing his mind over in this movie. By the way, they do reach Eric Selvig, and his character in this movie is so good. I really dig what they did with Selvig, because in Avengers, you know, as you know, Eric Selvig was mind controlled by Loki nearly the whole movie, and I mean he was like one, if not the biggest victim of Loki's mind control, with another Infinity Stone. The Infinity Stones and the toll it takes on the characters in the Thor franchise. The Thor franchise is deeply impacted by all of the Infinity Stones. If not most of them. I can't think of like the souls. I don't think the Soul Stone has anything to do with Thor. God forbid Thor had to sacrifice someone else he loved for something. I think Thor would be willing to, though, sacrifice himself at least for the Soul Stone in Avengers Endgame. I think Thor would be worthy to do that. But they wanted to tell more stories to Thor, so it had to end up being Natasha Romanoff. But sorry, going on an Infinity Stone tangent, back to the Reality Stone, where Jane Foster just discovered it, and this is where Thor is talking to Heimdall, and he's kind of reminiscing about Jane. And as Heimdall is about to tell Thor that he watches Jane, he tells Thor that he can't see her. So that's another good like point to maybe realize that the Reality Stone / Ether was being housed in some deep dark crevice in one of the 9 realms, and whenever Jane walks off into that portal to it, she's off-world. So this is when Thor goes to look for Jane, and Jane actually exits the portal on her own. And time passed differently, and there like 5 hours went by, and she only proceeded as a few minutes. But Jane, consumed the entire Reality Stone when she was in there, not on purpose. She wasn't hungry for Infinity Stones. She, like, just by misfortune, like this happened to her. So basically, his idea is to take her back to Asgard, which ends up being kind of the worst decision actually for him. This decision does not help him bringing the Ether and Jane to Asgard. But this is like his first instinct, and he brings her there, and she gets to see Asgard, which is really cool. We don't get to see a lot of people from Earth go to Asgard, and Jane gets to see it, and she's definitely mesmerized by the place. As am I. We get a lot of Asgard in this movie, and we get to see it from a lot of different angles. As Jane is being analyzed by Asgardian, what seem to be doctors, she's kind of schooling them. She's like, this is like a quantum, like, flux capacitor. I don't know exactly what she says. And then she's like, no, this is like a spiritual engine. And I'm saying all the wrong terminology here, but basically Jane is kind of reminding us that magic and science are the same thing, like we learned in the first Thor movie, and she sees kind of everything from a scientific perspective, which is a good see-through on Jane's character. I can definitely see why later that they gave Jane a lot more power in the story in Thor: Love and Thunder. And I kind of, because she's like more of a damsel in distress in this movie. She's not really like fighting for herself, and Thor has to save her from this inevitable doom. When in Thor: Love and Thunder, we get to meet Jane again. She's suffering, and she's going to be her own hero, opposed to Thor having to come in and save the day. She's fighting to stay alive, and she's trying to figure out how to do that for herself. So I kind of like that dynamic that we get from this movie to that movie. I think this movie really does a big attempt at making Malekith have more depth and weight than your mustache twirling villain, and I think the history with the Dark Elves does a lot for that. He doesn't have a lot of lines or a lot of dialogue, and we kind of just get straightforward from Malekith what he wants, and it's to bring eternal darkness throughout everywhere, all the 9 realms, and using the convergence to do that. So once Jane Foster gets the ether, he just immediately awakes from like a giant hibernation that he was in. At one point, Thor in the movie says this would have happened either way, which is very possible. But I mean, if Jane Foster didn't come in contact with the Reality Stone, Malekith wouldn't have woken up, or would Malekith have woken up because of the convergence? That's something that's kind of unclear, but it is perceived in the movie that he wakes up once the ether is awoke by Jane Foster. So he, like I said, he has some sort of connection with it in this movie. He commands an army of Dark Elves, which I don't know if all of them were in hibernation during the time he was, or just lingering in the Dark World, waiting for him to kind of come back and like give them orders. I'm guessing that's kind of it. The whole civilization is run by Malekith, and there's not like so much information given to us, but he has motivations, and they're just pretty straightforward. He wants the darkness to fall upon all of the 9 realms, and I think that makes for a good villain and an overarching story about brothers and family. And I think he kind of stands as a huge threat. Like, he's basically like a Thanos level threat. I mean, except if this guy had all the Infinity Stones, I mean, imagine how devastating he would be. Just because he doesn't have like some of the personality and charm and ego that Thanos had. I mean, this guy does have an ego, to be honest. He's he's a pretty cocky elf, if I'm being honest. I like that Malekith uses his army similar to Thanos does at the beginning of the movie when he's in the war with Odin's father. He kind of uses like all his, like he does like a raining fire thing similar to Thanos does. I mean, Malekith is no Thanos, but I'm surprised the Avengers like didn't get called in on this one. But everything was progressing so fast, that like in the story that like the Avengers wouldn't even have really had time to know what's going on. Like Tony Stark probably heard of what was going on, like about the conversions and like a big another portal opening up in the sky. I mean, that would be something that maybe Tony would like almost like not want to deal with at that point. But you know, he was probably aware, but he wouldn't have time to get all the way to London in a matter of like 20 minutes. And by the time Thor comes in and saves the day, there's no need for the Avengers. A quick spoiler for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It kind of reminds me of like, you know, we're introduced to an Infinity Stone in this movie, and it is like we kind of get to see a little bit of its power, but it's not like every single like aspect of all the Infinity Stones. So we don't know everything yet, but like this is like the first time we're hearing of Infinity Stones in the post credits of this movie. So Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, it kind of reminds me of that in a sense where we're like meeting a piece of the Kangs, and just a piece of that puzzle. And I'm assuming that like later we're going to get a lot more story to make that movie a bigger movie in the franchise, similar to Thor: Dark World, because we do visit this movie Thor: The Dark World again in Avengers Endgame, and this movie is a big, like the events of this movie are a big reason they can go back in time and take the Reality Stone. We don't even really see the Reality Stone ever again until Avengers Infinity War. So this movie it does a really great job of setting up the Reality Stone and the other Infinity Stones, as a matter of fact. One of Malekith's smartest decisions in the movie was to use one of his followers, Algrim, and have him turn into this big wicked monster called Curse. And this was sort of something that like Algrim volunteered to do, and he gets stabbed by Malekith and turns into this big like raging beast. Like he's not as big as the Hulk, but he's like you got to compare it to the other creatures in the MCU. Like he's no Hulk, but this guy is raging and he's scary and he's darker than the Hulk. So this is what Malekith uses to get inside of Asgard. We don't know how exactly, but Curse, Algrim turns into Curse, and Curse gets taken into the Asgardian prison, and Loki sees him getting brought in, and this is kind of where things start to go to crap really fast, and he does something like, after he was already stabbed by Malekith, Algrim / Curse stabs himself and like hulks out even more in the cell of Asgard, allowing him to break out of the cell and start wreaking havoc from the inside of Asgard. And at this exact moment, the Dark Elves they have this cloaking technology on their ships, and they start to attack Asgard, and Heimdall like sees it coming only like a glimpse before the ship arrives, and he does this really cool maneuver where he's running over the Rainbow Bridge and jumps onto one of the ships and takes it down, only to reveal that there's like 10 more ships on their way. Heimdall's so cool, but I mean, he wasn't enough to protect Asgard in this instance. The Dark Elves' technology was beyond the Asgardian detectors, and Heimdall, the guardian of Asgard, in a sense. It's a shame because that Heimdall like puts that on his own back, but it wasn't really his fault. This is something they couldn't have predicted, or could they have? I don't know. Maybe if Odin didn't like lie about did Odin lie, or was Odin lied to? That's not clear either. Did Odin lie about the ether being destroyed because they thought that Odin thought that it was destroyed, and maybe his father didn't even tell him the truth about it being hidden somewhere because it's that big of a temptation. And Odin immediately kind of knows what's going on with Jane Foster, and he knows it's an Infinity Stone, and he pretty much doesn't know how to get it out of Jane. So like by the time that the Dark Elves start attacking Asgard, because again, something that I don't really get, but I guess it goes back to like the creation of the Infinity Stones. Like I think the Dark Elves maybe were the holders of it from the very beginning. Malekith has this like kind of like how Thanos knows where the stones are in Avengers, like Infinity War. Malekith knows where the Reality Stone is at all times when the Reality Stone is awakened. So he just knows to attack Asgard when they're vulnerable, and in terms of like not even knowing that they were coming. they thought the Dark Elves were pretty much destroyed and vanquished, but he went into a hibernation. So this leads to an attack on Asgard, destroying so much of Asgard. Asgard is like ripped to pieces in this sequence, and Thor does a good job of kind of tearing it apart when he's escaping later. But I mean, the place is already in shambles. So the Dark Elves attack Asgard, and there's kind of this war sequence happening. And then as Curse is breaking out of his cell, he approaches Loki, and he doesn't let Loki out of his cell. He lets all the other prisoners out of his cell, but not Loki. He could tell. They even say it in the special features that he doesn't see good in Loki. This guy, I mean, and not like this bad guy doesn't see good in Loki. This bad guy like knows Loki is no good. But Loki one-ups himself on being just the worst, and he directs the giant Curse on where to go. He says, take the stairs to the left, and this leads to the death of Frigga, Thor and Loki's mom, and Odin's wife, the Queen of Asgard. This is like one of the biggest deaths in the movie, and it's a big moment. There's a big funeral afterwards, and it's kind of a beautiful sequence with a really great soundtrack. But her death is really hard on Thor, and the minute it happens, Thor walks in, and he can't protect her, and he bashes Malekith in the face with a big old burst of lightning, burning Malekith for the rest of the movie once he walks in on his mom being literally murdered by him. So this is going to give Thor a huge reason to team up with someone he never thought he would again, his brother Loki. Loki is basically dead to Thor, similar to how, Odin is exiled Loki. Thor, he barely has a care for Loki in the world after what he did to New York. There were moments during the Avengers where Thor is trying just so desperately to stop Loki from doing what he's doing, and Thor can't stop him. For Thor and Loki to team up, even Loki says to Thor when Thor's coming to Loki's cell, you must be really desperate to come to me. And when Thor comes to see Loki, Loki is presenting himself, how Loki can do projections, and Loki's presenting himself to be way more put together than he actually is. He's broken up about the fact that he led his mom to die. And I don't think Loki assumed that would happen in all this. I think Loki thought he was probably giving his brother a big fight, maybe giving his brother a hell of a time, or giving Odin a hell of a time. But I think deep down, Loki knows that his family is capable of protecting themselves. And when he sees the fact that his mom died, most likely because of him, I think he's ridden with guilt. The death of Frigga is most likely an absolute point in time in Loki's story, because as we learn in Loki the show, skip ahead about 30 seconds if you haven't seen Loki yet. But in the show Loki, we know that this moment when he finds out at the TVA that he caused his mom's death, he is completely awestricken by that, and the fact that he missed his mom's death. This is literally something that impacts him in this movie in that exact way, without us seeing exactly as much of it. So that kind of helps us get into his mind a little bit on how he feels about what he did to his mom. Loki is about family, and Loki does want vengeance on the Dark Elves. I believe Loki just always wants the throne, and he would do anything for a throne. So by the end of the movie, when we see Loki on the throne, the fact that Odin might have even given it to him, which I'm not 100% on, but I believe that happened. The fact that Loki is sitting on a throne by the end of this movie shows a huge stretch in character development for him. So after the Dark Elves attack Asgard, meanwhile back on Earth, there's a lot happening, like with Eric Selvig and Darcy. I not so much really. Like Darcy is getting Eric Selvig out of a mental institution, in which we see our Stan Lee cameo. He asks for his shoes back because Eric Selvig's doing this huge demonstration on the Nine Realms and like quantum mechanics and like pretty much like discovering the multiverse in Phase 2 this early on, like on that chalkboard behind Eric Selvig. He's going nuts. Basically, like having the Mind Stone control Eric Selvig's mind, he's given this like crazy wisdom of the universe, and it's too much for one man to contain. So it drives him basically insane to where like he has to take his pants off when he's going into thinking mode, which I really like. So to get back at the Dark Elves, Thor wants to go and bring Jane to Malekith in the Dark World and have him extract the ether because they don't know how to do it. And then once he extracts the ether, he's going to take Malekith out. And Odin doesn't agree with this. So Thor has to come up with a plan to break out of Asgard because they've shut down the Bifrost. And the way that they're going to break out of Asgard is through the ship that Malekith literally crashed into Odin's throne room. And by the way, when he does this, he just completely obliterates Odin's throne. Asgard might have some really good repairmen or some technology that like builds structures really fast, because by the end of the movie, Loki is sitting on the throne and the place seems pretty well reconstructed. So Thor's plan is to steal this ship, bring Jane and Loki upon it. So he has to break Loki out of prison and kind of break out of Asgard without hurting anyone, because the Asgardians are his people. So this is kind of like the most heisty thing we get in this movie, and it's one of my favorite sequences. It's a really fun sequence for Thor and Loki, and it's unfortunately like another example of how Jane is just exhausted like throughout all this action when they're escaping in this elf ship, this elf foreign ship that Thor is flying through like the waters of Asgard. We get so many great visuals of Asgard during the scene, and Loki like trying to tell Thor making fun of Thor's ability to drive this thing. That's really funny. But Jane is like passing out during all this action, meaning like her body, it's taken the Infinity Stone has taken a toll. That is said very prominently throughout this movie, through Jane's actions. She's getting eaten alive by this thing, which just makes the events of Thor: Love and Thunder, which seemed like a movie that's lighter in tone, it deals with heavier things. So I think the world of Thor, that movie makes me like this movie more, and that's what I love about the MCU in general. So once they get to the Dark World through a portal Loki knows how to get to this portal, so it makes me wonder if like some of these portals just exist no matter what, or that the convergence is just causing these portals to like come about in like random places. Like Loki's escape plan though led directly into a portal into the Dark World, and it did seem like it was his plan. So that's something I'm a little unclear on, but it worked out for them, and they're at the Dark World, which is filmed in Iceland. So the Dark World has some really great ambience about it, and the fact that it's filmed on location on like volcanic ash, it's like very like jarring. It's a jarring view of the Dark World. Like it's a different place we've never been. It definitely feels like another realm, and I really like that, especially at the end of the movie when Thor is fighting Malekith and like going in that world and back to ours and into other realms. It's a really cool fight sequence that's not far from this point of discussion in which we're at right now. Basically, Thor and Loki trick the Dark Elves into thinking that they're fighting, and like we even get to see Thor's hand cut off by Loki when he's having Mjolnir come to him, and I mean at first you're thinking, man, Loki, he's really doing a good job at deceiving in this movie, but it's all part of a plan to trick the Dark Elves. So Loki pretends to give Jane Foster up to Malekith, and he believes what's going on, and he takes Jane and like puts her into the air like telepathically and like extracts the reality stone out of her. And after this happens, or while this is happening, Jane is like having a vision of the eternal darkness that Malekith is trying to make happen through the convergence. So Jane is kind of like bestowed with his knowledge on maybe how to stop it from happening with her science at the end of the movie. And this is the moment where Thor tells Loki now, and Thor actually tries to lightning strike with Mjolnir the ether, and this turns it into a bunch of shards. It doesn't, like, the Infinity Stones are so strong, which is a testament to how much it took out of Thanos to destroy these stones later in time. The fact that like Thor cannot destroy this thing no matter what, even by the end of this movie, at the end of this final fight, Thor can't destroy it. So basically Thor attempts to destroy it, but Malekith takes in the ether and successfully escapes the Dark World to go carry on his assault on the Nine Realms. And in this moment, Thor and that big angry monster guy Curse are fighting each other, and Loki is taking out a ton of dark elves. Loki is definitely wingmanning it, and after that, like, guys that him and Thor put together their plan, you can only trust Loki. You can only trust him as far as you can put your hand out, right? Anyway, Thor and Loki take out most of these dark elves, but Loki realizes that Thor is getting his ass kicked by the Curse, the giant hulking dark elf monster, and this guy is like laying into Thor. He's beating and bloodying Thor, maybe even more than Thor ever gets in this entire movie. And Loki like literally stabs him in the back with a sword, and Curse takes Loki and puts him on the sword with him and impales Loki. So it looks like Loki is completely dead, and we assume Loki to die. But while Loki is on top of Curse, he ignites a grenade on him, and completely this monster self-implodes in giant orange light. It's visually stunning. And he's like, "See you in hell, monster." One of my favorite Loki moments. So Thor loses Loki, and this breaks Thor. Like, Thor just lost his mom, and now he lost his brother. So going into the final act of this movie, Thor has got like some vengeance against the Dark Elves. So after Loki dies, Thor and Jane appear to be stuck on the Dark World until Jane gets a phone call from her date at the beginning of the movie, realizing she has cell phone reception, and that helps them realize that there's a portal directly to the place where Jane started off and found the Reality Stone. And she finds the car keys that were dropped into the portal. So conveniently, they have a ride out of there. So they go to visit Darcy and Eric Selvig along with the intern. And Thor and Jane and co. devise a plan. They need to know where the convergence is happening so they can beat the Dark Elves to it. And apparently, like the Stonehenge ancient monuments, we even see Thor knock them over in the What If episode for Thor. This thing, along with other ancient monuments around the world, they culminate into the spot of the convergence. So like this happened thousands of years ago. So the ancient civilizations put a roadmap as to where this would happen actually on a regular map, which I think is a really cool detail. So they figure that out just in time. Like, the convergence is happening literally in the next scene. So they basically just make it to Greenwich, London, the spot of the convergence. And it makes sense because this is kind of where all the paranormal portals have been opening up and whatnot. So Team Science, as I'll call them in this movie, Jane, Eric, Darcy, and the intern, their job at the end is to put up these poles that kind of, I don't know if they're like activating the portals, but they're used as weapons against the Dark Elves. And it seems like they're like making these portal things go crazy so they can like send the Dark Elves in all these which way directions when Thor is fighting them. And this fight between the Dark Elves and Thor is pretty epic. I mean, this city of Greenwich, London, is completely destroyed in the making of this fight, and you can only imagine what effects it'll have on the world of the MCU. And I know that it's explored in the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. That like the season, like I think it might be the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is happening at the events of Thor: Dark World, and when that happens, there's an actual episode where they have to deal with like the fallout and the devastation that caused. It also happens in the after effect of Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which you can imagine on a show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. If you remember the twist in Winter Soldier, spoiler alert, S.H.I.E.L.D. is Hydra, and Hydra's been operating in the dark all this time. It's going to take a big toll on that show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We may talk about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at some point in our run of our podcast. I mean, there's a lot of other things I want to get to before that. However, I know it's a really good show. I saw a lot of it as it was kind of coming out, and I binge watched a chunk of it once on Netflix. I never finished it, though. So what do you think? Should I cover Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? MarvelManiacPod@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts. So in this final fight between Thor and Malekith, there's portals opening up everywhere, and the fight takes place all across London. This ship that Malekith lands in London like destroys like the city block that they land on, and Dark Elves are starting to take over. So it's kind of a scary sight. It reminds you a little bit of the first Avengers, and it's like you're thinking it's like an Avengers level threat. But Thor is able to like handle this one on his own with Team Science, and these poles that they're putting up, kind of scattering the Dark Elves. They're not really much without Malekith. Malekith's goal in this is to get to the center of the convergence and activate the ether and bring darkness upon all of humanity and life, so the Dark Elves can thrive in that. So by the end of the fight, Malekith is doing just that, and Thor is handed off by Jane these poles that he throws at Malekith, and it kind of rips Malekith apart in the end. Like the very final moments of this fight are taking place in like a sea of red, Reality Stone red, and Thor jabs this giant like science pole into Malekith, and Jane teleports Malekith off world after Thor like electrifies it into him for one last time, leaving the giant ship that Malekith arrived in like hovering, ready to topple over on top of Thor. Like Thor is down, and Jane runs towards Thor, and you completely think they're going to be crushed, but the ship portals out of our reality and into another realm, the dark world, on top of Malekith, and takes Malekith out. I would worry a little bit if I were Thor, maybe if Malekith was still out there, but I'm sure he went through some precaution to figure out that Malekith was taken out by the giant ship in the dark world. After everything that the Dark Elves put Thor through, you would imagine that Thor would like probably double check and make sure Malekith was done for. We learn later, like in Thor Love and Thunder, that Jane and Thor do have like a relationship, and Thor comes back for Jane, but we do leave Jane in this movie with Team Science to kind of talking about what had happened in the events of this movie, and kind of wondering if Thor will come back to her. And it takes so long to know that he did, really. It's kind of like sad to leave her at this point, like especially knowing what happens to her. I care a lot. You care a lot about Jane. I care a lot about her as a character, since she goes so far back in the MCU. You know, the fact that she ends up becoming Thor herself later, which we'll talk plenty about when we cover Thor Love and Thunder. I might just be going like in somewhat of an MCU cinematic order from this point on. I missed a couple of things in Phase 4. You know, I started covering Marvel in Phase 4 with WandaVision and covered most of the titles going forward. I had a bit of an off period where I missed a couple of things. So if you're really desperate to hear some of that Phase 4 stuff I missed before I go through kind of these older movies, which I mean, Stand Up in Time, the Sacred Timeline is flourishing with amazing things to talk about. So if you'd prefer me to like talk about Multiverse of Madness way ahead of Avengers Age of Ultron, for example, email me, marvelmaniacpod@gmail.com. I love to hear your thoughts and your feedback. And hey, one email can make a big difference on the way this podcast goes because I'm really listening to your input. So a little bit off topic, but I mean, we're gearing towards the end of this movie. You know, we've kind of rounded up everything that's happened. Thor returns to Odin, who was actually Loki, and Thor lets Odin know, aka Loki, that Loki made a huge sacrifice, so he doesn't really want to rule. You know, Odin's trying to give, he presents himself like Loki totally knows that Thor isn't going to take the throne, but he's telling Thor the throne is his now as king. What are you going to do next? And Thor pretty much tells Odin, I'm not ready to be a king. You know, I want to be with Jane. I want to, you know, fight on Earth with the Avengers so much. He doesn't say that exactly, but that's pretty much what he's getting at. He wants to protect the 9 realms. He's down for that, but he's not really ready or even willing to be a king. Personally, for me, Thor is really a king ever since he becomes worthy of Mjolnir again at the beginning of Thor. At the end of Thor, sorry. I think Thor is completely worthy, meaning when he is worthy, he is worthy of being a king as well, just because he doesn't choose to sit on the throne like Odin. I mean, he's out there literally fighting to save the universe instead of sitting on a throne. So I think Thor is completely like king material. He just doesn't want to technically have the name because he's been humbled throughout his journey through the MCU up to this point. And I mean, he's about to get a lot more humbled after Ragnarok and the next two Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. Thor goes through maybe the most of any character in the MCU. Loki is revealed to be on the throne as Odin, and we went over that a little bit earlier in the episode. Like I said, I'm gonna guess that Odin gave the throne to Loki. I don't think Loki like intimidated Odin to leave. It's just not very like Odin. I think Odin would have been ready to step down maybe once he saw his son was worthy at least of protecting the throne in his own right, because he was willing to work with his brother, kind of what Odin would have wanted all along for his sons. The post-credit scene of this movie is Sif, Fandral, Vostag, and Hogun, all of Thor's crew. They're bringing the Reality Stone to the Collector, who we will again meet in this phase in Guardians of the Galaxy. In my last episode for Iron Man 3, I was talking about how we're going to go over the movies in this phase, and I didn't bring up the Guardians of the Galaxy. I actually missed them as a part of this phase because it's like the Guardians of the Galaxy is its own movie that culminates into Infinity War, but like it's kind of like starting that story similar to this movie, kind of starts the story of the Infinity Stones, even though like in the Avengers, even as far back as Captain America, the first Avenger, we're getting glimpses of the Infinity Stones. We don't really know for sure that they're the Infinity Stones. We kind of start piecing together after the post-credit scene of this movie, well, where are the other Infinity Stones? And the Collector's like, why are you giving me an Infinity Stone? And one of Thor's crew is saying, basically, it's not wise to have two Infinity Stones. And this is the first time they use Infinity Stones in one place. And the Collector is like, pretty much like twirling his mustache, and I don't know why. I don't know why they're trusting the Collector with this. The Collector must have built a reputation, and a positive one, in Asgard. Him being kind of a personable guy, you kind of wonder why they'd bring it to him first. But maybe it's better to have in the hands of someone, so somebody can't just take it. Like Thanos ends up doing, kind of. By the time we get to the Infinity Stone, the Reality Stone in Avengers Infinity War, Thanos has completely decimated the area in which the Collector houses all of his collections. So I think that's a really cool aspect to have it this early on. And then later in the Guardians of the Galaxy, we know that the Collector has the Reality Stone. And then he's like, the last thing he says in this post-credit scene is 1 down, 5 to go. So the Collector, we know from the What If series how potentially horrible and evil the Collector can be and grow. The fact that we know he's trying to actually collect the Infinity Stones, and for whatever purpose that might be, kind of goes to show that the Collector probably has a bigger story in the MCU, even going forward. Like, they're planting seeds in this movie, for especially like right now in that post-credit scene with the Collector, like they're planting seeds for things that are like still yet to come in the MCU. And we know the Collector and the Grand Master are connected in one way or another. I don't know if they're brothers or they're cousins, but they're from like the same people. So that's going to be really interesting to delve into now that the Infinity Stones are technically gone. Or are they? Can the Infinity Stones be reformed? Thor Dark World, back to Thor Dark World, instead of the greater picture of things. Thor Dark World is kind of like a movie that the rest of the MCU kind of like sits on and needs to grow in the Infinity Saga. Thor Dark World was a ride, and it gave us a deeper look into some of our favorite characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, being Thor, Loki, Jane Foster, and even Eric Selvig and Darcy Lewis. The enemy Malekith, he like wasn't as one-dimensional of a villain as I've kind of heard reviewed when the movie came out. I think he's just a fine villain for Thor and Loki to come together to fight and to set the stages for later films in the MCU. Could Malekith have been a little bit more of like Thanos? Yeah, maybe they could have written it that way. But I think this movie was really trying to explore the relationships between Thor, Loki, and what a loss in the family would do to those two, and how those two react to losing someone they love. And I think that the movie does a wonderful job of it. It also gives us a lot of Thor and Jane. Anyone who loves that relationship as much as I do, you know, it's good to see Thor and Jane back together, and kind of some hints and teases as to what's to come for Jane and Thor Love and Thunder, and Thor Ragnarok, where we get a lot of follow-up to what happened with Loki after he took the throne. So we know what Loki does, but we'll talk about that when we get to that movie. This has been a wonderful review, in my opinion, and I love looking back at movies that I've seen already for this podcast and talking about them with you and sharing my love for the MCU. And I kind of like talking about it from the perspective of someone who's seen everything and then going back and seeing kind of where it fits in the bigger picture. As someone who's been like along for the ride of the MCU, like in theaters, like a lot of you might be, I think it's like a way more fun way to explore these movies, as if like I'd rather do that than like come in here and pretend like I haven't seen it and pretend react to it. Like, it's more fun to just talk about like everything else that's happened, because it makes like those things paint this universe, and that's why I think we're all fans of the MCU. So thank you for being here today on Marvel Maniac and MCU Aftershow. This is your host, Eric Cicada, aka Mr. Honest. Make sure to follow us on social medias where we've been posting a lot more on Marvel Maniac Pod, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. Also on YouTube, Marvel Maniac Pod. We've been uploading all of our podcasts there and shorts. We're also patreon.com/Marvel Maniac. I haven't put bonus content up in quite a bit. However, I will start uploading regularly in the near future to that Patreon. So join us. A positive review on the show goes a long way. Wherever you're listening, make sure to rate us and give us a positive review. And until next time, Avengers, disassemble.